Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna, bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you sports fans out there like you and me. This is episode number 338, and in this episode, we're here to continue along our mini-series of our 2025 NFL season team recaps. This is part 4 of that mini-series, and in this part, we're going to be talking about the 6 teams that have made it to the NFL playoffs, and, well, they only made it past the first round. And, yeah, it's those 6 NFL wildcard losers. So we talked about 18 teams. We're more than halfway in our mini-series. And in case you missed those parts, after this episode, make sure I recommend you to go back and listen to those 18 teams that I talked about. And if you're a fan of those teams, go and see what I recommend those teams do to try and have a better 2026 in September. So that being said, before we get started, follow me on all platforms at Very Cold Lasagna, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, audio platforms, whatever you're listening on, whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and as well as turn on the notification bell and leave your comments down below. So that being said, let's get into part 4 of our 2024. What year is it? We're going backwards now? 2 years backwards? Oh, man. We're in the DeLorean now. Hey, sorry. 2025 NFL season team recaps. This is part 4. We're already more than halfway through, like I said. And now in this episode, we're here to look back at the 6 wildcard losers, the first round losers of the 2025 NFL playoffs. Beginning part 4 of our 2025 NFL season team recaps, we look at the Kitties in Blue to talk about the Carolina Panthers, as they finished 5-12 in a 2024 campaign that was not so great for them to start most of the year, but they finished on a high note with better play from their second-year quarterback, Bryce Young, and they actually eliminated 2 teams from playoff contention. So building off a nice late game stretch to finish off that 5-12 campaign, the mission for last year's offseason was to build on that momentum, or one would think at least. But unfortunately for Carolina, they half-assed that mission. While they drafted a nice receiver in Arizona's Teratola McMillan with their 8th overall pick, they barely did anything else to fix their league worst defense other than re-sign Mike Jackson and JC Horn, who were a nice cornerback tag team, but that was pretty much it. Like, they had so many problems on defense in 2024, yet they didn't do anything to address it. Regardless, even with the half-assery that they did in the offseason at this point in time last year, the Panthers entered this past season with a bit of a higher microscope after the late 2024 turnaround, and yet still they kind of also have a very decent fighter's chance in a weak NFC South. So when you look at this team in the regular season, what I liked about this team was Bryce Young. He was still okay. Even with this inconsistency for as much as he struggled with his accuracy still in some games, Young continued to play much better than he did in his first 2 years by playing more to his mobility to extend drives, whether it was rushing or moving out of the pocket more. And that helped a lot with the addition of McMillan and a late season rise from an unknown guy by the name of Jalen Coker. And that came to fruition late in the season. That also helped improve in Bryce Young's I don't know if it's necessary to say development, but I guess you could say is better third year. Meanwhile, when you look at the defense, you also got another great year from that tag team corner duo in JC Horn and Mike Jackson. For JC Horn, he got a big fat contract extension this past offseason, and he really lived up to it with even more lockdown coverage, staying healthy again after his first 2 years of not being able to do so. And he led the team with 5 interceptions in another Pro Bowl season for him. Meanwhile, you look at Mike Jackson, he was right behind him in interceptions with just one short of him, 4, and deflected plenty of passes in key moments, and including that Week 12 Monday night game against Brock Purdy. So even though they lost that game, but still, it was still another great year regardless from that duo. And then when you look at this Panthers season, it was defined by some big wins for them. When you look at those games against the Green Bay Packers, the Carolina Panthers, they're facing themselves anyway, the LA Rams especially, and then the Tampa Bay Bucks in the first game. They were big underdogs in those 3 matchups. The whole team defied expectations on both sides, especially in that regular season game against the Rams. 2 big picks on Matthew Stafford, especially a pick 6 on the first one, and then they had a late touchdown from Bryce Young to get the win. That saved their playoff hopes going into the bye week and then going into the last couple of games of the regular season. But unfortunately, for the Panthers, there wasn't really much else for them in terms of good stuff, because when you look at the bad stuff from them, one thing that I touched on earlier in this portion for their review, I didn't like I didn't like what they did in the offseason, and that came back to bit them. And that was, well, where was the defense other than J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson? Sure, there were very small improvements as the season progressed. Like, I did like the rookie play of Nick Scorin in the pass rush. He led a team high 5 sacks that was tied with other defensive end Derek Brown, but that was pretty much it. The whole defense couldn't rush opposing quarterbacks. They couldn't stop the run, and that put a lot of pressure on Horn and Jackson to defend the pass, and that's not necessarily a good thing. That lack of pass rush showed a lot of problems in this defense. So, and for as good as Horn and Jackson were, they could only do so much against opposing receivers. And then when they were coming off the bye week, they had a golden chance to win the NFC South after they got a big win over the Rams. And then during the bye week, they saw the Bucks lose to the Saints and the Falcons in a 4-day stretch. But they blew their own chance to win the NFC South outright. They had a chance to do so when they came back to face the Saints, but they didn't do that. Sure, they beat the Bucks the next week, but they didn't do that afterwards. Because they were too inconsistent and they were too undisciplined, and they had to fight to the finish, and they needed some help to win that division. So the Panthers, they split their critical 2-game series with Tampa Bay to close out the season, finished 8-9, but again, they had to get much needed help from guess who? The Atlanta Falcons in beating the Saints. Yes, the NFC South came down to not them, not Tampa Bay. Yes, 2 teams that were not even in playoff contention. So, yeah, they had to root for the Atlanta Falcons to beat the Saints to barely win this division for the first time since 2015 when they went to the Super Bowl and lost. And this is the first time in NFL history that they won it twice with a losing record. So they went into the playoffs where everyone expected them to lose, and were massive underdogs again against, ironically, the same team that they beat in Week 13 against the Rams. But yeah, they once again made the Rams sweat. They made the Rams earn every bit of whatever they wanted to do. So despite making the Rams sweat in this game, they bowed out. They were on the verge of an upset, but unfortunately, their weaknesses came back to bite them. So they bowed out in the end of their wild card game in a very big nail biter, but still not a bad turnaround for these kitties in blue. But if they want to do it again next fall, they got to make some serious efforts to get better. So when you look at this offseason for the Carolina Panthers, they have not even say decent amount of cap space. They have very little cap space. At the time of this recording, around $9 million in money to spend. So not a whole host of money to go around. Their first round draft pick is the 19th overall. And I'd say a decent amount of draft capital at 7 total picks, including that first round pick. Some decisions to make in terms of free agents to keep around, like Rico Dowdle at running back, linebackers DJ Wanham and Christian Roseboom, O-lineman Cade Mays and Austin Corbett, and safety Nick Scott. So when you look at the needs that they have to address this coming month, you look at the front seven. As I mentioned before, they could barely touch opposing quarterbacks, and that placed more pressure on that defensive backfield. Nick Scoren, the rookie, and Derek Brown, they played well, but they needed stronger help around them. Meanwhile, they had serious trouble defending the middle of the field in both pass and run plays. So, yeah, when you look at that front office, they must improve there. Like, they didn't do it last offseason. Well, this offseason, like, they saw what happened in the first round. They saw what happened all season long. They must improve there. So they also have to decide on picking up Bryce Young's 5th-year option. He certainly improved throughout the year, but Dan Morgan has to wonder, like, is this enough to give him a 5th year? He also made some improvements in that 5-12 2024, but again, is it enough to keep him around? And then you also have to get more receiver help to support Bryce Young and Teratoa McMillan. He'll have a bigger target on his back next season. I'm talking about McMillan. But Jalen Coker's late season surge, including in that first round matchup against the Rams, could help him out if he continues to play well enough. But I still think the Panthers should use free agency in the draft to get Bryce Young some more help in the aerial attack. So these Kitties and Blues, they took some steps forward this past year, winning the NFC South barely with a losing record. But when you look at how next season will pan out, the Falcons will have Michael Penix Jr. with the new head coach and Kevin Stefanski. The Saints will be near 2 of their rebuild-ish with Kellen Moore and Tyler Show. And then you look at Tampa Bay. They'll have a healthier Baker Mayfield, but still with some uncertainties with the rest of the team. But nonetheless, they'll be back. General Manager Dan Morgan and Dave Canales, they can't cheap out. They got to do what they can to improve on this team, or next season will just prove to be a flash in the pan. The young stud Green Bay Packers once again were looking to get over the hump and make a deep playoff run after 2 years of being the number 7 seed in the NFC playoffs. When you look at this point in time last year in the offseason, fresh off of getting their butts whooped with undisciplined play against the Philadelphia Eagles, it wasn't an eventful offseason for Green Bay, but they made some nice moves like adding corner Nate Hobbs. But more importantly, in the NFL draft, which was held in their place, they finally drafted a receiver in the first round, which Packers fans, the cheeseheads, were desperately pleading for the front office to do. They drafted Texas receiver Matthew Golden and TCU's Savion Williamson. So they drafted 2 receivers overall in the NFL draft when it was all said and done. And with some expectation, they had some expectations again that the Packers were gonna, do well in the NFL this past season, and yeah, they were gonna be one of the favorites in the NFC North. And just when you thought that was just gonna be the ceiling, oh no, it all changed to higher expectations when the Green Bay Packers made a big time trade just before the season started, when the Cowboys were calling, and they traded away their top edge rusher, Micah Parsons, and the Packers, they made a big all-in move to go and get Micah Parsons from them. So they suddenly get Micah Parsons, and that trade for Parsons inserted the Pack into Super Bowl contender status. So yeah, the Packers, they were finally in that conversation. But there's a but, and I'm not talking about the double T's. The expectation remained that they'd go as far as Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur would take them, in my opinion. So when you look at some good stuff about the Packers this past regular season, when Christian Watson came back from his ACL tear from the end of the 2024 campaign, he was out for 9 games, which showed just how important he was to the Packers offense. Watson, when he came back in week 10, he gradually returned to playing how we did at that point in time prior to the injury. So he reestablished himself as the top receiver. Matthew Golden, he wasn't developing as expected quite yet, but Watson was Jordan Love's go-to guy alongside Romeo Doubs, who stepped in greatly in his absence. But Christian Watson, when he came back, was just as productive as he was before he went down with the injury in 2024. And then, surprisingly, towards the end of the season, when he had to fill in for Jordan Love with a concussion late in the year against the Bears, and then the post-Christmas game against the Ravens, Willis posted up a nice game against Baltimore by moving the offense pretty well and threw for a touchdown and rushing for 2 before the offense stalled out. But still, it gave a quarterback-needy team some consideration, and they're still having considerations at the time of this recording as the offseason is rolling on, into signing Malik Willis and giving him a chance to compete for a starting role next season. Big fat contract, though. I mean, I don't know about that. But still, it still gave QB-needy teams this offseason some consideration. But when there's good, there's also bad for the Pack. And that comes in the form of the defense. So this Micah Parsons trade initially made the Pack look like a tough defense to track, especially in the middle of the field. But in reality, it ended up masking the same problems that this team has been having for the last 3, I guess you could also say 4 years. Because in the broad scope of things, yeah, they're still not on par. In the front 7, like Edrin Cooper and Isaiah McDuffie were the only productive pass rushers and run stoppers outside of Micah Parsons. But especially in the defensive backfield, they were getting cooked again, thanks to very weak cornerback play, especially when you look at that shootout that they were having against the Dallas Cowboys in week 4. And then when you look at the rematch with Detroit on Thanksgiving, and then the 3 games when they played the Bears. So, yeah, that cornerback play still is a major problem for the Pack. And that ended up getting worse very late in the season for certain reasons we're going to get into right now. And that was the injuries. Injury mania running wild as the season progressed in the second half of the year. It started with the offense, though. Tucker Kraft tore his ACL in week 9, and then center Elton Jenkins fractured his lower leg the following week, and that would both impact the offense as Jordan Love, mainly in the passing attack, couldn't attack defenses in the middle of the field anymore, and he ran into a little bit of pressure with Elton Jenkins gone for the year. And then the defense would be heavily impacted much later in the year because, well, their big acquisition in Micah Parsons, he tore his ACL in Denver in week 15, and the pass rush was back to where they were before they traded for Parsons. Ineffective and nowhere to be seen. Gone. Finito. And then the following week, you had Jordan Love get concussed the following week in Chicago, and then he didn't play the final 2 games, out of safety. While corners Nate Hobbs and Bo Melton, they were lost for the season with knee and ankle injuries too, further impacting the very weak cornerback play. So that made it much worse. So when you look at how the Packers did this past season, they looked like one that was finally going to break its hump of being a number 7 seed and at least make the NFC title game midway through the year. But unfortunately, the injuries, the bad defensive play, it led to a 4-game losing streak to close out the season, all while losing the NFC North to the Chicago Bears. And they pretty much ended up in the same spot that they were for the last 2 seasons. And that was a number 7 seed. And they finished with a worst record at that, 9-7-1. And that tie was to the Cowboys. Talking about woof. So as a number 7 seed for the 3rd straight year, they actually managed to dominate for 2 of last 3 games as a number 7 seed. But in this one in particular against the Bears in the 3 match in the wild card, they managed to dominate for most of that game. But despite that domination and one of Jordan Love's best games, Matt LaFleur and his squad, they blew a 21-6 fourth quarter lead, and they let their division rivals rapidly and hurriedly score on them twice to send them home. Like, one would have thought that big game choke would have led to LaFleur getting fired, and I was calling for LaFleur's job. Like, that all-time choke on the Bears, that should have called for LaFleur's job. Like, LaFleur has been there for quite some time, and as a Niner fan, like, I've been calling for Kyle Shanahan's job for like a little bit some time, but I gave past year a little bit of slack, for the coaching job that he did. But for Matt LaFleur, like, he has choked a good amount of games, but this was absolutely the worst. But the Packers elected to keep him on for next season for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it is what it is, and he's still there. So since they decided to keep Matt LaFleur and general manager Brian Gutekunst, they have some work to do if they want to finally get out of this 7th seed rut, because if this is their ceiling, then there's conversations that need to be had. So looking at the offseason that is going to be happening, like really going to be happening in the next couple of weeks, in terms of money to spend, well, not much. They're actually in debt, $4 million. So they got to clear some cap space to be cap compliant. And looking at their picks, their first round pick is nowhere to be seen. They traded that away to the Cowboys, which was supposed to be 20th overall. But their first actual pick is in the second round at 52. But even with the trade, the first round pick traded away to Dallas, they actually have a decent amount of picks with 8 total. So not too shabby at all. But looking at some of the key free agents, some decisions have to be made though. Like backup quarterback Malik Willis, O-lineman Rasheed Walker, receiver Romeo Doubs, linebacker Quay Walker, and corner Bull Milton. Some of the needs that they have to address this coming offseason, I think one of the big ones that they have to do is replacing Brandon McManus, their kicker, because he really faltered late in the year, especially in that playoff loss to the Bears where he missed a crucial kick that put their opponent in great position to go and get the eventual winning score. Like, that was a very bad job by McManus and the special teams. Rich Bisaccia also stepped down from his coaching position, like his coordinator position. So the Packers got to go ahead and find a suitable new kicker to go alongside the new special teams coordinator. And then they got to also upgrade the defensive backfield. Keyshawn Nixon and Xavier McKinney, alongside Nate Hobbs before he got hurt, they had no help in coverage alongside those three, and that got exposed again in various games. Like, this has been a problem for the last 2 to 3 years for the Packers, and I still don't understand why they don't address this. Like, they have to get 2 or 3 new corners for depth and maybe a new starter. They are very much needed for a struggling secondary. And then they got to upgrade the interior offensive line. Like, they've struggled to protect Jordan Love, and run blocking for Josh Jacobs was like a little atrocious last season. Like, Jacobs had a little bit of a down year this past year, which paved the way for interior defenders to have their way against those two. And yeah, like, some upgrades are needed there. So the Packers, they really have to stop beating themselves into the 7th seed in the purgatory that they've been in there for the last couple of years. And while some of that comes from overcoming injury bugs, that also comes from Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst putting a better effort to not just improving the defense, but also Matt LaFleur coaching better in late game situations. Mike Tomlin's Pittsburgh Steelers started out well in position to win the AFC North in the previous year in 2024, but unfortunately, they fell apart late in that season because, well, their flaws got exposed, especially with quarterback once again, which was Russell Wilson at the time, along with Justin Fields too. And they eventually lost the division to the Baltimore Ravens, and in a 3-match in the first round, they got their butts handed to them. So not only in this point in time last year, in that offseason, was to go and look for a long-term quarterback answer, but was to also win the AFC North and win a playoff game for the first time in nearly a decade. Or no, actual decade. But I digress. But when you look at this past time in the offseason last year, unfortunately, the Steelers elected to go short term again. And they took a real long while in doing so because they decided to wait around and go and get Aaron Rodgers in June. In June, they literally waited till June to go and get Aaron Rodgers. And once they did, though, despite all the waiting around, which I don't know why it took forever in doing that, that became the big talking point for everyone in the fan base and outside of it. So they wanted to see how Aaron Rodgers would play. But prior to that, the Steelers did make a few big moves, like trading away George Pickens, the disgruntled receiver, to the Dallas Cowboys. And they replaced them with a trade for DK Metcalf, who also wanted a big fat contract from the Seahawks, as well as trading away their top safety in Minkah Fitzpatrick to Miami for top corner Jalen Ramsey and tight end Jonnu Smith. So yeah, during that time, the Steelers were under the assumption that the reunited Mason Rudolph would again be the starting quarterback to the Steelers fan base's size. But once Rodgers signed on late, it became apparent that the black and gold were at least trying to go all in to try and win at least the AFC North and maybe like another Super Bowl for both Rodgers and Mike Tomlin. So when you look at this past regular season for the Pittsburgh Steelers, some of the things I liked about them was that front seven, especially the pass rush. While they did have trouble stopping the run, though, the biggest strength for them remained getting to opposing quarterbacks, both interior and exterior. TJ Watt once again had another big season of very high defensive end play. He had nice production with 10 tackles for losses, 2 interceptions, and got to the quarterback. Not as well as he did in previous years, but he still had a nice amount of sacks at 7. And then when you look at the rookies in Derek Hammond and Jack Sawyer, they showed some promise too as productive depth players. And then Keanu Benton, he would have a career best year in a year where Cam Hayward was having a slightly down year despite the All-Pro selection. So yeah, that defensive line was pretty good, and one of their best games came down in Week 9, where they forced 6 turnovers and 5 sacks on the Indianapolis Colts quarterback Daniel Jones. Meanwhile, when you look at Jalen Ramsey, he transitioned over to safety following the trade, and I'd say it paid off for him. He had multiple third down stopping tackles. He was very good in coverage, and he deflected a bunch of passes downfield, and he put up his first 2-game sack in Week 6 against the Skid Marks. So I say the transition from corner to safety for Jalen, it was pretty nice for him. Unfortunately, for the Steelers, when you look at the other side of the ball, it wasn't as efficient because while Aaron Rodgers put up 4 touchdowns in his Steeler debut, and mind you, against his former team in the Jets, ironically, it initially had people believing he really could deliver on that promise of, trying to lead this team, guide this team into the postseason and make a deeper run in the postseason. Not so fast, pal. Now, he did have his moments of, being his old self and playing relatively clean games for some parts of the season. But when he got to other parts of the season, he also had some pretty bad ones because he couldn't get it together with his receivers. And his age was also, again, showing some wear on him, where he was making a good amount of his own mistakes. Meanwhile, you look at the receiving core, he didn't have much help of a second downfield option alongside DK Metcalf or any other reliable general pure receiving options other than Kenneth Gainwell or Pat Freiermuth, which not only didn't help Aaron, but also angered him at times when they couldn't get on the same page. And then you also look on the defensive side, like I mentioned earlier, a pretty bad run defense, and that came in spite of a good front seven. But they had difficulty stopping the run. They allowed multiple 100-yard rushers with at least a touchdown or even 2. And sure, you could look at the statistics and see that, but you can also even use the eye test when you look when you're watching these games, and you can still even tell just how bad their run deep when they had trouble stopping the run. Their run defense was that bad. They did bad against the likes of Chase Brown, Derrick Henry. I mean, that was a given. Even Kenneth Walker and James Cook. So, despite their issues and inconsistencies that caused them to lose games in the back half of the year, they somehow managed to stay afloat, even as the Ravens were catching up to them in the AFC North race. They could have won the AFC North outright by beating the skid marks in Week 17, but they elected to do it the hard way. They're like, screw it. We want to throw away this game, let ref ball go up against us, and fight with the Ravens in a win or go home game, so we can have it in prime time the following week. And well, they barely won that game and the division thanks to Tyler looping the final field goal that sent the Steelers with the AFC North, with the 10-7 record, and with the home playoff game. Aaron Rodgers played pretty solid in that game. He led a go-ahead game-winning drive, but unlike in that game, which clinched the division, in the actual first-round matchup against the Houston Texans, Rodgers had none of his youthful magic in this one. He succumbed to that powerful defense, despite his own defense getting gifts from CJ Stroud and his own problems. And yeah, the Steelers once again bowed out in the wild card round. Another one and done playoff loss. And yeah, they fell apart in the fourth quarter, and they let the Texans score 23 unanswered points on top of themselves getting shut out in the second half. Talk about woof. And for the Steelers, and in Monday night prime time too. A very not so great way to lose your first home playoff game in 5 years, but yeah, also not a great way or the end of Mike Tomlin's tenure as the Steelers head coach, as he resigned the next day, in a move that honestly was long awaited for not just the fan base but also for the Steelers. And I guess you could also say it ended up being well needed for them too. Well, Mike Tomlin never had a losing season with the Steelers, which, honestly, a lot of people in the media landscape, it was very high touted, but more than half of those seasons had them looking so mid. I talked about it since the inception of this podcast. Despite the wild card berths and now this AFC North title, this team looked mid for more than half of those seasons. And it's very understandable for their fan base rejoicing for change. And that change ended up being former Packers and Cowboys head coach and Pittsburgh native Mike McCarthy, who comes with his own history of winning a Super Bowl, but not much else after. But maybe this time will be different. Who knows? So looking at the Pittsburgh and their ongoing offseason as it starts to pick up, they have a good amount of cap space. They have a good amount of money to spend in the coming weeks. And that comes in the form of $44 million. Their first round pick is the 21st. And when it comes with that, comes 12 total draft picks. So they have plenty to work with in this upcoming draft. Looking at some of their key free agents, obviously the number one thing to look at is quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Some other ones include Calvin Austin at receiver, running back Kenneth Gainwell. And on the defensive side, there are certainly some ones that they have to consider, like Kyle Duggar at safety, Chuck Clark as well, and Jabril Peppers, linebacker Cole Holcomb, and defensive lineman Dean Lowry. And looking at the needs they have to address that are important for Pittsburgh in Mike McCarthy's first year, is Mike McCarthy enough for Aaron Rodgers to play one more year? Or does Mike McCarthy go in another direction? Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers have deep roots during their time in Green Bay. But when you look at Aaron Rodgers, he looked like he was on his last legs of his career. Not just with the Steelers this past year, but when he was on the Jets in 2024. At the same time, the quarterback in free agency and the draft, it's not that great. Although they could trade for one that's in the market with the plenty of picks that they have. So Mike McCarthy has to make a interesting decision on his hands. in like the next couple weeks. And when he does make that decision, he has to add some help around DK Metcalf and Pat Freiermuth, because Metcalf was the only deep threat that whatever quarterback that was there. Prior to this past season, the receiving core has been a big issue under Mike Tomlin, so more help is needed there. And they also have to fix the problematic secondary, because for as good as Jalen Ramsey was this past year, the rest of the secondary had troubles pass defending, especially in high-scoring games that they lost. So more help is needed around Jalen Ramsey and returning Deshaun Elliott, who was lost for the year after Week 8 with a knee injury. And their corner group needs to be upgraded outside of Joey Porter Jr. So overall, when you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, they once again held off the long term this past season. And while it worked in getting the AFC North on the final missed kick by the Ravens, that ended up flaming out when it mattered most in their lone playoff game. So looking ahead, Mike Tomlin is finally gone. In comes Mike McCarthy as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But in the grand scheme, is it going to work out long? Is it going to work out long term? Is it going to be more of the same that the Steelers and its fan base have seen for the last 20 plus years? Tune in to find out and see if he and the Steelers figure out the quarterback that is hopefully a long-term one. After his NFL return brought the jolt back in the powder blue side of LA, there was hopeful optimism in year 2 under Jim Harbaugh and the LA Chargers, which brought an 11-win season and a playoff berth in 2024. Even if they chargered it in that playoff berth against the Houston Texans. So to take a step forward in Big Jim's second year and compete in the AFC West, at this point in time last year in the offseason, they had to get more help for Justin Herbert and retool the defense. Now, they did a mix of that by adding corners Dante Jackson and Benjamin St. Juste, which they had mixed success in their careers. And they added a familiar face at receiver in Mike Williams to try and help out Ladd McConkey. While they also drafted running back Omari Hampton to complement their free agent back, Najee Harris. And when you look at this team going into the season, they were still some flaws, though, notably at receiver, even with the addition of Mike Williams. But they still had a good shot at contending in the division, even if things went their way. So looking at the LA Chargers this past season and what I liked about them, they had a very good front seven. Jesse Mitzer's defense, who was the defensive coordinator, by the way, they formed into a very good group with a number of run stoppers and a number of pass rushers that could get to the quarterback. Tuli Putu, I'm sorry for mispronouncing that last name. He had a great year in the trenches. He was bullying offensive linemen and runners with 20 tackles for losses, and he got 13 sacks. So he had a very strong, productive year. And then you get a trade pickup, Odafe Owehe from Baltimore. He made an immediate impact when he got traded as a strong depth piece. And then Khalil Mack, while he suffered a dislocated elbow in week 2, he came back a month later and he finished the season very nicely, as if he never got hurt. And then you look at Troy Dye and Delshawn Phillips. They were solid run stoppers too as depth, and they filled in nicely when Denzel Perryman was out for the season several games early in the year. So overall, when you look at that front seven, it was very nicely done, and they had a very productive year. And when you look at the running back position, when Omari Hampton was on short-term IR, Najee Harris had a season-ending torn Achilles. You had to look somewhere at running back, and that's where Kamani Vidal came in. And he was initially cut as part of roster cutdowns in August, but he was still on the practice squad, and then he was promoted to the active roster in week 6. And he made the most of his opportunities, especially in that 144-yard total game versus the Dolphins, in a big win for them. He went on to repeat this success versus the Titans, the Steelers, and the Raiders, and he found himself as a secondary back behind Omari Hampton, who both shared the workload. So for as things were good for the LA Chargers, this is where things went south for them throughout the season. And that was mainly because of the offensive line. Yeah. If you thought my team's offensive line was cursed, oh boy, just look at the Chargers. Look at the Chargers' offensive line. They were the most cursed unit of the whole team and probably one of the worst in the NFL, mainly because of injuries to not just the starters, but even the backups got hurt. Look at starting left tackle Rashawn Slater. Already gone before the season even started with a major injury. Swing tackle Joe Alt. He had to move to Slater's spot at left tackle. He got a high ankle sprain in week 4 and then came back a couple weeks later in week 8 before re-aggravating the injury the next week that took him out of the season too. And then tackle Jamari Slater. He injured his hamstring in the Cowboys game late in the year, missed the final 3 games. And then right tackle Trey Pipkins. He dealt with a knee injury and an ankle injury throughout the year. And even the 4th stringers like Bobby Hart and Austin Deckles, they had injuries at one point. Like, injury mania was running wild in the offensive line for the LA Chargers. But injury aside, this unit was still very bad performance-wise with the starters that managed to stay healthy. And even when you had the starters that were there like for like a week or two, this is still not a good offensive line. Especially with a name like Mekhi Becton. He was a good sign at the time. He was a good sign for the Chargers, but boy, when he actually played this season, he was a big bust that couldn't protect the right side of the interior. And center Bradley Bozeman, he struggled to stay as the glue of a very terrible offensive line. And honestly, I couldn't really blame Bozeman for this because, well, yeah, when you have like a bunch of the offensive linemen injured, like you can barely do anything about it. So all this amounted to Justin Herbert like flying and running away under duress. He got hit a lot. He got sacked left and right. He threw a bunch of turnovers, and he even injured his hand late in the year. And while he got surgery on it to play in time against the Eagles, it still sucks. It still sucks for him to not have an offensive line for him. And then when you look defensively, the defensive backfield got flamed. Like Derwin James, yeah, he had a strong all-pro year. And then free agent acquisition, Dante Jackson, he was very solid in coverage. But they had a lot of trouble stopping the run, big and small plays against opposing offenses. Even if it didn't result in touchdowns, it's still not a good thing for this secondary to get flamed like that and to allow like all these kinds of plays. So when you look at this Chargers team in the regular season, it made for a very hellish year 2 for Jim Harbaugh's Chargers. Yeah, they finished 11-6 again, but they once again got embarrassed in another one-and-done playoff game, this time at the hands of the Patriots, that pretty much showcased everything wrong about a once promising season that started 3-0 against the entire AFC West. Like, keep that in mind. They had the AFC West in their grasp by the start of the season, 3-0. And then right after that, it was just like wiped away. And like they lost control of that. Like, not great. So Big Jim, after the season, he promptly fired offensive coordinator Greg Roman, who also had a problem dialing things up for this Chargers offense. So he fired offensive coordinator and good buddy Greg Roman to change things up for the offense. And in comes recently fired Dolphins coach Mike McDaniel as the new coordinator to hopefully help out this offense. Meanwhile, Harbaugh's safeties coach Chris O'Leary returns from his stint at Western Michigan under the same role as the new defensive coordinator. So there's some new faces in this coaching staff. And with these new changes, the Chargers hope to bring in some new fixes to a broken team. So looking at the Chargers in the next couple of weeks, they have a good amount of money to spend. Around $82 million to spend. While not a lot of draft capital because they have 5 picks total and that's it. So they got to spend those picks wisely. They start with this 22nd overall pick. They also have some decisions to make in free agency because there are some key free agents like Odafe Owehe and Khalil Mack, O-lineman Zion Johnson and Jamari Slater, and linebacker Denzel Perryman. So a lot of decisions to make mostly on defense. So when you look at the needs to address for the Chargers in the next couple of weeks, the biggest one is the offensive line. I feel like a restart is much needed. I mean, you look at three of the starters like Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater, and Trey Pipkins. They'll be back, but they need much better depth behind them. Mekhi Becton was a big bust for them, and he got released, rightfully so. I mean, no one likes to lose their job, but he sucked at his job, and he got released for it. And the decision needs to be made on whether to keep Zion Johnson. So they got to make a decision there. And then defensively, they got to re-sign Odafe Owehe and then add some quality help around him, because Odafe Owehe was a great trade pickup, but the Chargers got to do what they need to keep him and then add some help around him. Now, Khalil Mack has stated his intent to play again this year, but he's yet to make a decision on whether to re-sign with the Chargers. But at the same time, they should go for some younger talent too. And then staying on defense, they got to find better corner help to support Derwin James, because this has been a major issue in the last few years, and it doesn't do Justin Herbert and the offense any favors. Finding some lockdown corners in the slot and outside is going to be big for them. So Big Jim and company, they hope year 3 is going to fare much better than the last 2, but that all starts with getting their franchise quarterback much better help up front and fixing their defense. If the O-line is not going to be fixed in any good way, then Justin Herbert is fucked, just like it was last year. The Philadelphia Eagles were coming off their second Super Bowl win in franchise history, but it was how they did it was very interesting enough in the 2024 campaign. It was in dominant fashion over the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 59, and they entered this past year as the big target in the NFL, as the reigning, defending, undisputed Super Bowl champions. But yet they were still a big favorite to make it back to the big game for Super Bowl 60. So to build on their success from Super Bowl 59, they experienced some changes though, because of money limitations. They had to let go a bunch of people, especially on defense, like Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, CJ Gardner-Johnson, longtime edge rusher Brandon Graham retired, I think for a bit, if I remember correctly. Meanwhile, on offense, Jalen Hurts got his 4th new offensive coordinator in the 5 years he's been in the NFL, as Kevin Patullo, he was put on as an eternal replacement for the departing Kellen Moore, who went on to immediately sign on to be the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Fortunately, though, Howie Roseman and his front offense once again did a good job in filling in the blanks with those departures with free agency additions: Josh Uche, Adoree Jackson, Azeez Ojulari at defense, as well as the drafting of Jihad Campbell. So, yeah, Howie Roseman and his really good front office, they did a nice job in replacing those departures. So going into this past year, the team was again positioned to go deep in the NFC, and one can even say they were in good position to defend their Super Bowl title. So looking back at this past season for the Eagles, what I liked about this team was a nice strong year for their defense. While it took the first 3 weeks for Quinyon Mitchell to get going, him and Cooper DeJean once again were a dominant lockdown corner duo, with Mitchell and DeJean deflecting nearly 20 passes apiece in lockdown coverage. But even if they allowed several 100-yard receivers, primarily because there wasn't much help around them, but they were still very efficient in coverage. Meanwhile, you look at the front seven in the pass rush, they had another productive year against the quarterbacks, with standout specifics like Nolan Smith and Jordan Davis. And then you got Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean defending the middle of the field very well. So overall, when you look at this defense, it was a very nice year for them. Unfortunately, when you look at the other side of the coin, their offense was not so great. Jalen Hurts once again struggled with a variety of things all season, where the accuracy and chemistry issues with a talented receiving core, kind of like how it was last year, or yet another change in the offensive coordinator. Either way, he and the offense had several miscues that put them in unnecessary situations, or they just lost the game outright. And then when you look at his supporting cast, Devontae Smith and AJ Brown were the most notable guys that made their feelings spoken, although not explicitly, more so on social media, because, well, they love playing that social media game about how broken this offense was and how bad Jalen Hurts was playing. So, yeah, AJ Brown specifically, though, was the main culprit of that. Saquon Barkley, he still was playing at a good level, but it wasn't as good as the previous year. But the good side about that was at least he didn't get hurt because of the Madden curse. Because, well, in case you don't know what the Madden curse is, yeah, I mean, he was on the cover of this past year's Madden game. If anyone still even plays that, I recommend Mutant Football League, by the way. Meanwhile, you look at the offensive line, they were having season-long issues protecting Jalen because Lane Johnson missed a bunch of games, and their lone playoff game with the foot injury, and his backup Fred Johnson, he also was dealing with the foot injury as well. Landon Dickerson played through multiple injuries, and then center Cam Jurgens, he struggled mainly because of a back injury. While they were still getting pass protection, the O-line suffered in run blocking because, those injuries, and that affected Saquon, and because of how beaten up they were. And yeah, Nick Sirianni, Kim Patullo, that's why they barely used the tush push midway through the season, because of how beaten up their guys were. And maybe, the tush push was starting to have an impact on their players. And then staying on the offense, oh boy, speaking of those two, their play calling. Their play calling was so very interesting in the not so right of ways. They first start calling out aggressive stuff in the first half, such as Hurts lobbing up a deep ball to either one of his receivers or an out-count run for Saquon. But then afterwards, in the second half, when they were having like a late lead in the fourth quarter that was like unmanageable for the opposing team, or having a big lead in general, they would stop scoring. They stop scoring and get conservative and start calling the most vanilla stuff possible. And their opponents were able to pick up on that fast to drive the Eagles offense off the field. And an opposing team would start to rally back. Look at the game against Denver in week 3 early in the season. That's the biggest indicator of that. To put it bluntly, but Kevin Patullo's offense was very vanilla. So, like I said, I had the initial preseason feeling that this team had the build to defend their Super Bowl title, but it soon became apparent that the hangover set in on them, even if they managed to win the NFC East again. Like, the offense was too vanilla. They were often stuck in neutral. And when Philly fans thought they would break out of their slump in their playoff run when it began, the Eagles and their problems, and it finally reared its ugly head in a painfully bad exit at the hand of the hospital-ass team 49ers in that wild card game. And it wasn't pretty. Sure, it was a close game to the end, but it's still a sloppy game for the Eagles as they finished their season 11-6, finishing with the NFC East for the first time in 20 years. He had a repeat champion, but still they lost in that fashion. It was a disappointing end for the then defending Super Bowl champions that are having plenty of in-house questions as we speak. They already answered one of those by replacing Kevin Patullo for Packers quarterback coach and former career backup quarterback in Sean Mannion. So that's one question already answered, but now they have to answer a bunch more. So going into the offseason that is ongoing for the former defending Super Bowl champion Eagles, they have very little cap space to work with, around $3 million. Their first round pick is at the 23rd spot, and they have eight picks total to work with, which is not a bad spot to be in for Howie Roseman. But what is a bad spot for him is the number of free agents that is for him, and what he has to do to try to keep a decent amount of them, like tight end Dallas Goedert, defensive lineman Jalen Phillips, Azeez Ojulari, Brandon Graham, and Josh Uche, linebacker Nakobe Dean, and safety Reed Blankenship. Like, that is a bunch of people, a bunch of really good people that are set to hit free agency. That's a tall ask for Howie Roseman. Probably the biggest thing that they have to address in the offseason, as we talk about the needs that they have to do, it starts with A.J. Brown. Rumors continue to swirl about whether he'll be available for trade. And while the Eagles, as well as A.J. Brown himself, continue to downplay that, there's still buzz about it. It's still going to be a big question regardless. But for now, Howie and Nick must address the depth behind Davante and A.J. Brown because, well, they still don't have much else behind them. Like, they tried with a Jahan Dotson, but he's too inconsistent. So they really have to refill some depth and some really good one at bat for Davante and AJ Brown if he's still there. And then they got to re-sign and refill on depth at the defensive line because, again, they have a bunch of free agents and, well, not enough money to keep them all. So just like last offseason, Howie Roseman's got to pick and choose at least one or two that he can keep around and then find cheap replacements, whether it's through free agency or the draft, for the others that'll be gone. And then they got to consider some competition at all spots on the offensive line. While adding depth, there were a lot of health and underperformance issues this past year from nearly every spot except for Jordan Mailata. He did pretty well for himself. Lane Johnson and Lane Dickerson have stated their intents to return, but in Johnson's case, Howie Roseman's got to start finding a future successor for him, whether he retires. So that's something to consider. So the Philadelphia Eagles couldn't quite get things done this past year. They couldn't quite get going in nearly every facet, especially on offense. And not even in their only playoff game could they finally break out of their slump. But they still remain at least the best team in its division and a top tier one in the NFC. They could have a good shot again this coming season in September. But the many questions that they have to answer will determine how far they'll go next season in the next few weeks. A greatly underperforming and unprepared 2024 saw the Jacksonville Jaguars limp to another bad finish, and it saw Doug Peterson get the boot after the season. 2 years removed from an AFC divisional appearance and win the AFC South, and really, really big comeback against the LA Chargers in a wildcard game. Shahid Khan and the Jags needed to convince a new duo to come over to the land of all elite. So when you look at this point in time last year for the Jacksonville Jaguars in the offseason, yeah, that wouldn't be so easy because the head coaching search was really hindered by candidates, understandably so, because they didn't want to work with general manager Trent Baalke. And yeah, because of his sketchy history. So that forced Shahid Khan to show him the door also late in the coaching search. So once Baalke was fired, though, the Jags found their new head coach and former Tampa Bay Bucks offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, who let the contract extension off the table of his former team, and then new general manager and former Rams director of scouting strategy James Gladstone. So they got this new duo in hand, and when it came time for free agency, their first moves, including somewhat reinforcing the offensive line via Patrick McCarry and Robert Hainsey. And then when you go to the draft, they traded up big to draft touted hybrid player Travis Hunter from Colorado. So going into this past season, the new regime somewhat addressed their needs, but I felt going into it, they needed to do more. And that left me concerned about Trevor Lawrence because of them not doing more to give him help. So that left me a little sketch about how the Jaguars would do in 2025. So when you look at some of the things that didn't leave me positive about the Jaguars, that was the growing pains between Trevor Lawrence and Liam Cohen. Lawrence, once again, made a lot of mistakes to start the year, throwing very tight window balls or overthrowing receivers, too many turnovers. Some of those mistakes also had to do with him not getting yet up to speed with Liam in his scheme with offensive coordinator Grant Odinsky's his scheme. And yeah, that was not great. It was still going on even as the Jaguars were winning games and having upset wins over like the 49ers and the Chiefs. And Liam Cohen was very very explicit about those frustrations. Like he was showing it on like the Fox cameras or CBS cameras. They were really showing that Liam was getting heavily frustrated with Trevor's mistakes and those growing pains to the scheme. Like they were well apparent about that. So also what was well apparent was the middling secondary play. Despite a pretty good front seven, this unit was just okay in coverage, but they were allowing too many breakaway plays. Andrew Wingard was the only productive player in that unit, but he was playing on the deep back end of that group, and Jordan Lewis and Travis Hunter were still struggling in coverage, and not even the trade for stud Browns corner Greg Newsome helped out. And then when you look at Travis Hunter, by the way, his hybrid play as a receiver and a corner, it didn't really translate to the pro level. Now, granted, he is a good player, but yeah, he showed better promise as a receiver, but not so much as the lockdown corner that he was in Colorado. And his rookie season ended early after their Week 7 trip to London with a torn LCL in his knee. But yeah, going into this next season, I think he stated his intent to play more at corner. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch out for as the offseason work goes along. So when you look at the good stuff that happened for the Jacksonville Jaguars, you look at how they did in the second half of the year. Choking away a 29-10 fourth quarter lead to the Houston Texans in a key Week 10 rematch between the two teams. It seemed to have woken a fire in them the rest of the way. The defense was playing much better with Josh, not Bills Allen, Devin Lloyd, and Eric Armstead. They led the front seven in really pressuring and shutting down a majority of their opponents. And meanwhile, you look at a defense and a secondary that's playing a little bit better, and then you look at the offense. While it still wasn't pretty in play, especially a Week 12 game in Arizona, Trevor Lawrence finally adjusted to Liam Cohen's scheme and played much more decisive and limited his turnovers. Two standout receivers in Parker Washington and trade acquisition Jacoby Myers, they emerged as Lawrence's preferred options, and they were very helpful in his improvement during this time. And then you look at the kicking game. Cam Little was very impressive as a kicker. He was one of the NFL's best kickers last year as a late round rookie. But yeah, he broke out this past year. Then that started like not even before the season started, like the actual season. He started out with a preseason 70-yard kick. Like that's impressive. But unfortunately, didn't count. Didn't count because it was the preseason, pal. But he managed to still establish himself as one of the league's most accurate kickers and managed to make history twice. Broke Justin Tucker's 66-yard record with a 68-yarder in Week 9 against the Raiders, and then managed to make a 67-yard kick in the season finale against Tennessee, which set the record for the longest outdoor kick and the second longest NFL field goal overall. So, man, insane year for that guy. Yet he didn't make the Pro Bowl on the AFC side, and yet he didn't make an All-Pro team. That's a little bit insane. So not a pretty early portion of the year for the Jags, even with big upset wins over the 49ers and especially the Chiefs, the defending AFC champions, because of the growing pains and of the adjusting to the new coaching staff. But once they finally put all the pieces together, they went on a nice run to win the AFC South and earned one of the best records in franchise history at 13-4. Unfortunately, just not enough for a top 2 seed. They only got themselves the 3rd seed because the Patriots and the Broncos had better tiebreakers. And their good season came to an end early in their wildcard game versus the Bills. And a familiar theme that Jags fans saw in their early season games: relentless, self-induced team mistakes that also included from Trevor Lawrence. So even with coming up short, they have a chance to build on the success for next season in a mid-pack division. Yeah, I say mid-pack because, well, you look at the Texans, you look at the Colts, and you look at the Titans. They have plenty of question marks around them. So when you look at the offseason that is coming up in the next couple of weeks for the Jags, they need to get out of debt. It's $12 million in debt. They got to clear some money so they can spend it. And you look at their first round pick, it's at 24th overall. They have a good amount of draft capital at 9 total picks. Looking at some of their key free agents, there's a few of them, like Devin Lloyd at linebacker, corners Montari Brown and Greg Newsome, safety Andrew Ringard, their key top man in the secondary, and especially running back Travis Etienne, who had a great year. Looking at the needs that they have to address this couple weeks, you have to upgrade the defensive backfield for the Jaguars. The cornerbacks were the weakest and had been for some time, even with Jordan Lewis getting a decently sized deal last offseason. And Travis Hunter is committing to this spot on a near full-time basis next season. They need to get better help covering receivers. They also have to re-sign Travis Etienne because he's coming off a great year, both rushing and receiving. So he should be rewarded by the Jags with a new big deal. But also finding him a good backup is necessary because they traded away his secondary piece, which was a good solid piece, in Tank Bigsby. Not sure why they did that, but it is what it is. And they also have to find better depth behind Eric Armstead, Josh Knott, Bills Allen, and Trayvon Walker. They had a good starting defensive line rotation, but one area where they can improve is a new starter in the interior next to Eric Armstead. So the Jacksonville Jaguars, they were one of the most improved teams this past season. And while they exited earlier than a little expected, they could stand to improve themselves in year two under the Liam Cohen, James Gladstone regime. While there's still plenty of fixes needed for Trevor, fixing the defense is necessary for them to take the next step if they want to repeat as AFC South champions next season. And that is a wrap on part 4 of our 2025 NFL season team recaps. We talked about in this one the Carolina Panthers, the Green Bay Packers, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the LA Chargers, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you're a fan of either of these teams or just wanted to take a look at these teams in general, let me know your takes and what these teams need to do to improve for next season. Leave them in the comments on YouTube or send me a message on my socials at Very Cold Lasagna on my Twitter or Instagram. And yeah, let's see what these teams do next season to try and make a better playoff run. But yeah, we're getting close to the wire towards the end of our 2025 NFL season team recap series. But until then, that is it for this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I have been your host, Dylan Lasagna, once again bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you sports fans out there like you and me. Make sure to catch up on the other parts of our season team recap series. We've done parts 1, 2, and 3, and now 4. So after we've done this one, make sure to check out the other 3 parts where we talked about the other 18 teams that we've done so far. And yeah, we're getting close to the very end with the remaining teams that we have to talk about. So until that time comes, until I see you when I see you again, peace out.